Alrighty, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shannon, the Marketing and Communications Coordinator here at Directions. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Windows Server 2019 webinar session. So if you aren't too familiar with Directions, just kind of a brief overview, we're basically just an IT and professional development training company, and we help organizations, government entities, and individuals adopt technology through training. We also provide custom and blended training solutions to best fit various learning styles, so there's really something out there for everyone. All of our instructors are experts in their field, and they're very passionate about what they do. Before we get started here, I just want to mention a few things. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat box at the top right-hand corner of your screen at any time throughout the webinar. And then at the end of the session, we will turn on mic access to allow for open questions. You'll also see a poll box right under the chat. So throughout the webinar, there will be a new question popping up every once in a while. So if you could just take a second to fill each one out, all you have to do is select or type your answer, and it's submitted automatically. So this just helps us kind of better understand where our audience is at and helps us improve our processes for future webinars. Today we have Mike leading our webinar. He's certified as a Microsoft Certified Trainer and Microsoft Certified Solutions, including MCSE Mobility, Productivity, and Cloud, along with the new Azure Admin certification. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
All right, coming back in. Thanks, Shannon. Very good. Good day, everybody. I want to welcome you into the 2019 Server Seminar webinar with Directions Training. We're going to pretty much jump in here a little bit, talk about the 2019 features, Windows Admin Center being one of the major ones. We'll take a look and demo through that, storage, networking, and they talk a lot about hybrids now with 2019 going into Azure, so we'll also take a look at that. I'm just going to open my screen and bring up my slide deck, so give me a second. Go. There we go. Yeah, so pretty much I'll just jump in and talk about 2019 as far as the upgrades. So we got a slide here. Whoops, going over to that. Yeah, so I just put information here based off 2019, pretty much matching the 2016 licensing. So you still have the long-term service branch or channel, pretty much the 5-year mainstream and then 5-year extended. So if you're coming out of 2008 R2, then you have to jump to, the upgrade plan, which 08 R2 would jump to either 2012, 2016, and then pretty much jump to 2019. If you're on, 2012 R2, 2016, then you can do the direct in-place upgrade, or you might migrate if you don't want to reuse existing hardware. But as far as the mapping, it's 2016 standard to standard data center, so you can upgrade to data center from standard. Or if you're on 2016 data center, then it's pretty much a one-to-one match, 2019 data center. So the licensing still matches based off standard, giving you 2 free virtual machines, and then the data center being unlimited as far as Hyper-V and virtual machines. But then same thing with 2012 R2, where if you're on standard, right, going to standard data center, and then data center, one-to-one match based off 2019 data center. So if you're going into the long-term service branch with the first release of 2019, then you're getting the full GUI, right, the desktop experience, which again, we're still getting the semi-annual channel upgrade. So we still have the 6 months. So if you still, can still do the upgrades based off 6 months. They still give us core and nano if you're still dealing with the imaging there, the core and nano images. But also they give us, the server core base images. So they're still dealing with the core if you pretty much based off the, desktop experience if you're dealing with that. So we have the 2019 full version, long-term service branch, which we talk about. Let's see, go into the other one. So another big one they give us in 2019 is the storage. We'll look at the Windows Admin Center, which is pretty highly utilized now as far as middleware. So we have the the old MMCs and then the snap-ins, and pretty much a lot of the ones that pretty much went off the web interface. But we'll take a look at the Windows Admin Center, giving us a couple of different versions here of deploying storage on-premise or in the cloud. So they give us now the storage replica, providing storage agnostic, block level synchronization, asynchronous or synchronous replication between servers for disaster recovery. So we're thinking about on-premise, or I got a little graphic there for you based off, having a bunch of servers on-premise. And then this is the nice one if you're looking to migrate from older versions to the newer versions. So like 2003 R2 or 2008, take these on-premise servers and be able to migrate the storage here, either up into the cloud or to another location. So we'll take a look at that based off the storage replica, which is built into your server when it came in 2016, but now we have the ability to do mostly migrating of older server services, and then using the Azure cloud to maybe take 2003 or 2008 server data up to the cloud and then migrate it to another server, might be 2019. This is one of many. They got the Replica, and then, of course, then they have the storage migration service, which I think is a little bit better if you're going from older versions up. But the problem with the storage migration service is it seems like it's only built for 2012 R2, moving data from 2012 R2, and then actually server-to-server migration versus on-premise up to the cloud like Storage Replica can do. Another big advancement is REFS, Resilient File System. Resilient File System, again, marks bad blocks, never writes the data back to the bad block. That came in with 2016. Essentially, we could not do data deduplication on an REFS volume. Mostly the single instance storage, the chunking of data, saving the the bits once and then getting data back on the drive. Now we can put data deduplication on an REFS volume. Mostly, again, like large SQL databases, large virtual machines, which could be anywhere from a couple of gigs to maybe a terabyte in size. It spans over the disk pretty large. So REFS, again, marks the bad blocks, never writes the data back to it, so it moves the data off. So now we have data deduplication and also taking advantage of that with an REFS volume. We'll look at the storage migration service. It helps you inventory migrate data from one server to another. It's mostly, again, the Windows Admin Center becoming a skin on top of the other tools that we're familiar with. So it's really replicating data behind the scenes. They have enhanced storage spaces direct. Again, there's a lot of strides being made in the servers based off if you have like an on-premise data center or you're just a larger environment, but there are a lot of gains here even based off smaller environments. But you get building software-defined storage using, again, industry standard servers. Essentially, 2016 gave us 1 petabyte of storage pooling. As we're now 2019's up to 4 petabytes per storage pool and up to 64 terabytes per volume. So that's, again, going into your storage spaces direct. They're dealing sometimes with the storage tiering, just a bunch of disks, SSD and HDD together. The hot storage, the data access more often moves to the faster storage. And then, of course, data you may access more often, which they consider cool storage, might move to the slower drives. And that's, again, if you're still dealing with storage spaces direct on-premise, because then they have the file sync service, which kind of does the same thing, synchronizing on-premise data up to the cloud, which would be considered cool storage. Data not accessed more often would move off your on-premise storage up to the cloud, and then you would have a hot cache of data on-premise, but moving the data not accessed more often up to the cloud based off the file sync. And then they're mixing and matching your type of disks, mirror parity, mirror accelerated array, where they're actually taking multiple volumes and a part of the mirror and part of the parity, so they're mixing mirroring and RAID arrays together just based off the different types of storage that we have, right? Land first on the mirrored portion or gradually move to the parity portion. So they have, kind of like mirror 2 disks together, even a 3 mirror, and then having part of that being in a actual RAID array or RAID 5. So a lot of strides made in storage. This is just a breakout of course, data duplication was with us for a while. It's just the revamping of the 2019 version. Where here we can see the savings up in the upper right. You see like the different blocks of data that came from these different files. And essentially the data is only stored once within the chunk store within data duplication. It's really if you start reading the internals of 2019. I mean, on the surface, it looks just like 2016. But when you go into the internals or the revamping or the rewrite, then you're seeing that the IOPS, it's going to rely a lot on the disks you have it on. But general file, 50 to 60% savings. Regular documents like PowerPoint presentations, anything in Office, 30 to 50% savings. Get into the application library. But like I said, REFS volume, Resilient File System, storing SQL databases and VHD files, virtual machines. This is really what this is kind of for. So we're storing the virtual machine, a terabyte, 2 terabyte file on the disk. But when you look at it, it might be like 500K because most of the bits are already in the chunk store within data duplication. So they really did a lot of rewrites here based off 2019 data duplication. Over here, I can show you, let's see, which one was I on? Yeah, I have my virtual machine DC1. I'll right click, go into Disk Manager. Essentially, I just created a disk on here. It's an REFS volume, Resilient File System. Like I say, it starts marking bad blocks, never writing data back to it. Or if there's bad data on the block, it'll move the data off and never write the data back to that block. So I just got a REFS volume. I'll go into Server Manager. Over here in Server Manager. When this finally initializes on the left, we'll see the file and storage services, which I put data deduplication on this server. So I went up to manage add remove features. I added the data dupe feature in here, which over here on the volume you'll see. So on the left I have the volume. And here's my E drive, which is a resilient file system volume. Now I can right click, used to be gray. Now we can start enabling data duplication in REFS volume. And so this is in 2019. So to the service level, I mean, it's just like 2016, but now we're actually putting this on an REFS volume. And so we just enable, put on the schedule, and we're off and running with saving storage. So the other one here is, again, getting the data off your on-premise environment up to the cloud or Azure File Sync, which takes advantage of the Azure storage account. So you need a subscription. And with this one, again, this kind of goes, I read the documentation. It does say 2012 R2, but essentially, again, we should be able to sync data, like the agent. It's all about the agent. And you might have to like have the, because I know based off a lot of these services, especially if you're in like 2012 R2, that you have to get your PowerShell, get the PowerShell up to the latest version, like version 5. So there might be some, some components on the client side that may have to come up to the compatibility level. But again, we're looking at branch offices and then getting all your data maybe off these branch offices up to the actual centralized file sync in the server. The big gain here was multiple locations, right? HQ, branch offices, and then syncing data on premise out to the cloud, making available to other branch offices. I mean, you do have, you have the other replication scenarios. But again, this one's supposed to be helping you, again, getting the data up to a central location where you might be decommissioning these servers on premise, so you'd sync the data up to the cloud, maybe replace the server and sync the data back. But also, we're saying at the Azure file storage level, you can store up to 100 terabytes of data within one file share. So you can have multiple storage accounts in Azure and have more than 100 terabytes of storage up here, but each file share allows up to 100 terabytes of storage. That was the big gain here. So simplifying your life with cloud-based storage, the hybrid, like I say, a lot of things in 2019 are really based off the hybrid. This, again, is synchronizing on-premise data up to the cloud, which, again, centralizes your file service in Azure and transforms your file service into hot caches of data. This, again, is taking the data on-premise that's not accessed more often, or cool storage, and then moving only the data that's not accessed more often, like archival, up to the cloud, freeing up space on-premise. So again, not purchasing storage on-premise, don't deal with the hardware, but still having the the storage available to you in the cloud. All right, so that's another one coming at you. This is agent-based. You have to go up to Azure, log into Azure on the server you want to do this with, download the file sync agent, install the file sync agent, then go back into the Azure portal. You'll see your server's registered. You'll go into that server. You'll select what shares you want to start syncing, and of course, 1, 2, 3, the data starts syncing up to the cloud. And then, like I say, you have a couple of options if you want, like percentage, like, I want like 20% of data that's cool storage to actually replicate up. If you don't mess with the actual percentages, then it might start replicating all the data up to the file sync area. This, again, gets into the storage. I always, even when I did 2012 R2, when I did 2016, now 2019, it deals a lot at the hardware level. In other words, if you don't have all the hardware at the latest specs, then it's hard to take advantage of a lot of the new features. This one in here is pretty much your storage class memory. So essentially they went from USB drives to SAS, SSD. So they actually give you a chart here. Actually, even USB doesn't even show up here because it's so old. But then again, right, a little long ago, which is still out there, SAS SSD. I actually stole this chart on the right from HP, but you can see software controller media still dealing with the hardware layer. But then again, they have the SSD, which got slower, right? I mean, that doesn't seem slow to you, but to the system it is. So SSD still being a thing, but then you get the NVMe, right? Non-volatile memory. So they have these NVMe arrays. And I can give you a link. I'll put a link out here on the chat so you can actually look at it. It's a video from Microsoft and HP, which shows you these NVMe arrays, like they're 8 terabyte memory sticks, and they array them together, and they're getting a large array of storage. But the thing is, it's not just memory. We're using the storage class memory is either memory for the operating system or storage within for virtual machines and stuff. So when you look at the NVMe SCM, the newer spec of storage, you'd have to look at their presentation. Like they show you USB, then SAS SSD, then they show you NVMe, and now they have the slots for these storage class memory closest to the CPU. So we're offloading a lot of the processing, right, onto these storage chips. And this actually comes in where they're showing you, I guess Microsoft broke the barrier of like 3 petabytes of storage class memory within the operating system, pretty much on a 2019 data center server. So, I mean, Microsoft can afford those price points. They're just showing you the scalability. Again, if all you have is 2 Hyper-V servers on premise, you're creating a failover cluster. this still, you can take advantage of your storage, the actual performance of this. So yeah, I mean, they're talking about microseconds rather than milliseconds. So they're breaking milliseconds right down to microseconds and faster than that. It means my brain can't even comprehend the speed, but it's there. 10 times faster than NVMe SSD is really what they're saying. So if you can get to this level of hardware, storage class memory, a new generation of server hardware, including storage class memory, which obviously drastically improves performance of the server applications. Definitely on data center with Hyper-V servers and all that. So 2019, again, giving you a lot of things in the hybrid. Right, the admin center we'll take a look at here for the end. Security, a lot of things built in. The Windows ATP, it's actually Windows Defender Firewall, right? Advanced Threat Protection. A lot of things going on with application protection, now supporting Linux containers within 2019. And a lot of things within Hyperconverged. I mean, having a large Hyper-V data center on premise, or maybe using Azure Stack, which has a lot of servers involved with it. So this really helps you when you get into that scaling of the data center and 2019 data center. If you're dealing with a lot of Hyper-V or system center virtual machine management, larger environments. Because then you get into the hyperconverged infrastructure. This is more or less how Microsoft does it in Azure. If you really look at what's going on here in 2019, they're showing you the same configuration you can do on premise that, again, Azure Stack does or Azure in the cloud does with their data centers. So here, again, we pretty much have a traditional infrastructure, right? Ethernet switches, top of rack, probably some miscellaneous appliances. We're just virtualizing. We're virtualizing these appliances over in Hyperconverged network. The hypervisor, virtualization, mostly what you're left with in Hyperconverged infrastructure is the storage and the switches, because everything else is virtualized. Virtual machine, virtual appliance, virtual network, software-defined networking. So down here I have a link for you if you really want to look at this based off Microsoft solutions, or maybe you want to opt into a third-party solution with another provider. The aka.ms/WSSD will give you a lot of information based off how 2019 is now looking at hyperconverged networking. One of the big things is, again, on network, just like the cloud, having multiple locations. And then they talk about the virtual network peering, providing high-speed connectivity between, two virtual networks. Traffic between the virtual networks goes through the underlying fabric network with no gateway. Essentially all configured through software-defined networking, so that both virtual networks must be, part of the same data center stamp. So essentially we'd have like multiple racks and then virtualizing these and spanning across multiple racks. The thing about software-defined networking is you lose sight of the topology. You lose sight of the physical topology because you're just laying down a bunch of PowerShell commands and, more or less saying these virtual machines are against this load balancer. These virtual machines are against this application gateway, right? We have all kinds of things going on that are virtualized. So you lose sight of the physical topology because it's all being connected through software-defined networking. One of the other things, improved software-defined gateway, right? 3 times the speed in your tunnels, and of course also using the IPsec site-to-site VPN. A lot of this, again, they're working on it, but on-premise out to the cloud. Using the cloud as either your secondary data center failover, or again, spanning up to the cloud for web services, all kinds of things going on there. But they have automation of creating a site-to-site VPN. They have the point-to-site for networking, but they're coming up now in wizard-based. Instead of going through the configuration manually, they have a lot of wizard-based configurations now within the Windows Admin Center. And then, precision time protocol, pretty much, time sync. So enabling network devices to add latency introduced by each network device into the timing measurement. This is nice if you're dealing with Hyper-V or failover clustering where you have nodes heartbeating each other, and that the heartbeating or latency of the network might affect the bouncing of those services. So now we have, right, the precision time protocol, allowing that, that latency to be introduced into the sync, thereby providing a far more accurate time sample. So we don't have clusters failing services back and forth if it's just a latency within the pings or the heartbeat. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. Just more or less, if you think about it, just consolidation of virtualization over time. Right, we had physical, then virtual. Now we're just converting it into the virtual networking stuff is also being virtualized. So let me see over here. Let's just get this up there for you. I have this link. I put it in. Did I actually put it in there? Yeah, there it is. I'll push this link out here for you. Which again, I give you a link to my 2019 links for directions training. Mostly, again, a lot of the information coming out to what's new in 2019. Then they give you a comparison guide, so you guys can look at this information on your spare time over lunch. One of the big things is, again, desktop experience. Core versus desktop experience. Most guys want the GUI, so you get the long-term service channel, right, based off the version here, which I think is 1809. And then we still have the same thing as 2016, where if you go to the next version, it'll be core. So long-term service branch from the first version all the way out based off, right, of the service packs. And then system insights, which we'll take a look at this. We have Windows Admin Center, and we're going to get a lot of things now on premise that we have in Azure, more or less forecasting for it, forecasting of CPU utilization, forecasting of storage. So again, we have the Windows Admin Center. There's a System Insight node there. You'll click on it. You'll actually deploy the agent to the virtual machine or physical machine, whether it's in the cloud or on premise. And then usually within 5 minutes or gathering information every minute or every hour, it's like performance counters. It'll come down and start giving you trending of how, forecasting, like, your storage allocation over time. Like we're, growing maybe 1 megabyte a day, and then it'll just forecast forward of what your storage requirements would be. So it's pretty nice, giving you insights. If anything else, it gives you insights. But again, a lot of things in 2019, the hybrid, and really nothing to demo here, but it's really the advanced threat protection and security. A lot of things going on there with advancements. And you have software-defined networking, which is all about the PowerShell when you really look at it. But they're starting to GUIfy a lot of this. Where even the VPNs, networking, backups, a lot of stuff's pretty much brought into the admin center. So this is a good article. You can keep reading through it. Then there's the comparison guide, mostly based off standard data center. What you'll find is they're exactly the same except for licensing. All right, so you go back in 2008 or 2016, but then comparisons across. If you look at standard versus data center in 2019, that's the only thing different is, again, right, standard has 2 virtual machine licenses, lower cost, versus data center has unlimited virtual machine licenses. And then it's really based off the data center being, software defined. So this network controllers in data center, right? There's also the, shielded virtual machines, which were a thing in 2016. Now we have shielded virtual machines for Linux. So doing a lot of strides within the dev side. So take a look at that, all the different things coming in now with all the dark blue dots are all the new features within 2019. You have the Azure Network Adapter for doing point-to-site, on-premise out to the cloud, system insights with the agent, getting deeper in analog analytics, right? The file sync, right? Looking at synchronizing on-premise out to the cloud, and then, right, storage migration, which is really, we have migration utilities on the server, right? We can always install them, and sometimes people will do like even robocopy or just command line. But again, this just automates. It automates the process, and we can follow up on the job, and we can see if it's completed successfully. And then the whole thing with VM protection, like I say, pretty much protecting Linux now within shielded virtual machines. All right, so we'll take a look at the admin center. A lot of stuff here. Storage migration, network adapter, deeper dive, file sync. So mostly the major 3, like I said, I put your links up here. Mostly based off a lot of the newer stuff, like storage migration, network adapter, file sync, and the Hyperconverged network. So we'll go through that. So with this here, we have the 2019 HyperV servers, and then virtualization, right? Assume breach. This is really what Microsoft looks at when we kind of deploy things into the cloud, is looking at Microsoft saying everything's assume breach. So based off security, right, you want to make sure that everything is pretty much assumed. In other words, we're not having any kind of problems within the actual deployment. So within HyperV, right, they have the ability, right, to do shielded virtual machines. Shielded virtual machines, again, are saying that you really can't log in through RDP, right? Pretty much the only way we can actually log into the virtual machine is through the remote access. So, right, we always assume breach based off these scenarios, and virtualization fabric introduced attacks vectors. So again, we pretty much have, in my links, I have a lot of things there, right, based off looking at, the virtualization up to the cloud. So protecting virtual fabric. Mostly when you talk about fabric, it's storage. Mostly the bottleneck area, CPU, memory, storage, a lot of those things going on. And then making sure that we're always protected within our own on-premise or the cloud. So they'll talk a lot about 2019 shielded VMs, the host guardian service being added to add remove features, and then being able to have, Linux machines now being shielded. In other words, you can't just go in and, have a virtual machine on the VHD, the virtual machine disk, and we actually encrypt the disk. So if you actually take the disk off the server and, you have it, somewhere else, it's always encrypted. And again, the host guardian service allows me to remote in, but I can't do it at the host level. I have to do it at the guest level. So there's a lot of things going on there we can take a look at, but only a little bit of time to talk about it. But the big thing here again is, using Linux to shield VMs, having them guard it, and then this host guardian service installed on the server, so we can, deploy a Linux machine, but it'll be shielded. So it has a lot to do with certificates. You install this host guardian service, create self-signed certificates. The virtual machines are using the certificates, so we have to use them to actually decrypt the data. So again, if this virtual machine's removed from its host and tried to brought somewhere else, well, without that certificate, it just won't mount. You won't be able to access it. And of course, people logging into the host themselves cannot access the virtual machine because it's encrypted. So the only way to access the VM is remotely, like a 2016 server. Now we have it on Linux. So new simple attestation, VM Connect, PowerShell Direct with shielded VMs. If anything, you won't be able to log into the virtual machine through the host, but now we have the PowerShell Direct. So on the host, we can actually shoot PowerShell commands to the virtual machines or the guests on the host. That's about the only way we can access directly PowerShell Direct. Otherwise, with shielded VMs, it's all going with remote access. With Linux, it might be SSH, like using the PuTTY client with a SSH, and then you're getting in that way, but not through the hosts. So all about protection. If there's anything, right, protecting yourself against malicious users that might try to steal your VMs and crack into them. Here again, they're going to be encrypted. So again, Linux containers, being able to, and this is the big thing on the dev side. If you're, and this is the, it's been a thing for a while on the dev side. Azure's been doing it. 2016 had, Docker. So now we have being able to do Linux containers within 2016. Allow application admins to manage both Windows and Linux apps within the container, shielded VMs, right? Obviously, protects us from attacks or compromised administrators, the underlying fabric or where this, the virtual machines are stored. So they really can't, even if they take the VM, they can't crack it because it's encrypted. VM Connect for shielded VMs enhances interactive sessions. So it's like I say, it's always remote with, now 2016 or Linux. Kubernetes is now supported, the big Docker. So, Azure's always had it up until like last year. They went into like Docker, Kubernetes. So if you're dealing a lot with containers, right, lots coming at you. Major improvements with compute storage and networking components. And then you have the subsystem for Linux, which can be installed on Windows. And now, of course, we can also use PowerShell. There's actually installing PowerShell into Linux and then driving Windows from Linux, or putting Linux on Windows and then driving Linux from Windows. It's pretty much interoperability now between the two. So you got a lot going on there. And if you're into the clustering, right, failover clustering, they gave us now a cloud witness in Azure. Gave you a little diagram here where, again, you're up in the cloud, you have a subscription, and then from the on-premise environment, I'll be into this Windows 10 computer, and I'll be able to set up this point-to-site connectivity on-premise out to the cloud, so we can start having these servers on-premise start utilizing a VPN up to the cloud, or having the servers in the cloud access the server on-premise. Now, if you're, having multiple servers on-premise, because it was always, the numbers of 3. Failovers from one side to another. Active, they might be both active. But with Microsoft's failover clustering, it's always odd numbers are in your favor. It's always looking for odd numbers to be in your favor. So if one's down, 2 are up. So we're always looking at node majority. More nodes are up than they're down. So 3, always odd numbers work in your favor. So if 1 down, 2 are up. But then we always have, like, say, New York and LA. So we have a cluster spanning multiple locations. We only have 2 locations, but we need a third vote. We need a third vote in the cluster, so the third vote can be outside of the physical environment. So New York and LA are physical networks, and we put a cloud witness up in Azure. Becomes our third vote. So cloud witness enables Azure blob storage as a witness in the quorum for a stretch cluster, where again it's stretching multiple locations, and we need that third vote. So again, if New York is down, LA will lose what they call split brain. Or if we only have 2 nodes and one side's lost, it's split brain. It bounces back and forth, not knowing who's in control. So we need that third vote. We'll put that third vote out here in the cloud. So now we have 2 votes up and 1 are down. New York's down, but now LA assumes all node assumes node majority. So in 2019, you can now create a file share witness that does not utilize a cluster name object. In other words, this will not be stored within Active Directory. It'll just be an object up here in the cloud. But it simply uses just a storage account with the file share witness. So just a little file that's, again, paying attention. More or less what they call active, right? Active manager, where everybody's pretty much paying attention to everybody. So if the file share witness sees New York going down, it'll tell LA to stay up. So it's a third vote. They always looked at that third vote being in a separate subnet, right? The guy on the outside looking in, making sure all your services are up. Again, the file share witness should not be in New York. The file share witness should not be in LA, because if one of those sides are lost, then we just get back into split brain. So that's another option we have. Then the Azure Network Adapter easily connects your on-premise virtual networks. Or actually connects your on-premise environment right to the virtual network in the cloud. So we can do this through the admin center, performing a heavy lifting. There's literally, what'd somebody say? I think they said it took about 90 minutes. If you look at the Azure configuration, you went there and did it by hand. Somebody was saying, even on the network, a guy with a lot of experience, took about 90 minutes to set it up. If you set this up here, you probably click through a couple of dialogues, it does it automatically, and then you have connectivity on-premise out to the cloud through point-to-site VPN. So we'll take a look at that here in a couple of minutes. We'll do a rundown of the admin center. Another thing they did in failover clustering was allow you to use a USB drive, right? USB thumb drive, supporting USB thumb drives for the cluster witness. So if you don't want to use the cloud and you run out of other options, then of course you have a USB drive you can use as your cluster or disk, cluster disk witness. And that would be like, a true two-node hyperconverged environment. Just like 2016, we have the rolling upgrade. So if you're utilizing failover clustering, bring a 2019 server into an existing 2012 R2 or 2016 cluster, and then you can roll your services forward. Essentially, you're doing a one-to-one eviction. You're bringing 2019 in, moving resources over, and then evicting your older nodes, and then sooner or later, everything's over on 2019. So rolling upgrades. You can even do in-place upgrades if you want. But you can bring 2019 into a swap, or do an in-place upgrade of 2012 R2 or 2016 directly. You should always have a backup plan, as they say, right? You get halfway through it and something happens, you should always have a backup plan. Cluster sets, large environments. Adding clusters into clusters. So you have a cluster in, what they say is most environments or even larger companies don't create 64 node clusters. A cluster can be up to 64 nodes, right? Physical servers it can have, up to 64 servers in the cluster. Some people might only create 4 node clusters. And then you might have 2 or 3 4 node clusters. What you can do is wrap them up into a cluster set. So let's say you do have 2 to 3, 4 clusters, 4 nodes each. Roll them into a cluster set. Allows you to create large scale out clusters with greater flexibility without sacrificing resiliency. So you're merging smaller clusters together into a cluster set, and then we can fail over resources from different clusters over to different clusters. It's almost like redundancy on redundancy. Then we have the cluster being redundant, and it's also redundant against another cluster. So we can have passive active failover based off even clusters. Cluster-wide monitoring memory, CPU, mostly the bottleneck areas. Big thing in the storage again is how that storage is created. Whether it's just just a bunch of disks, a tiering process with SSD, HDD, or you're using NVMe or now the storage class memory. So we really have to think about how we're pretty much using storage now. There's so many options. Nested mirroring acceleration, enabling 2-node clusters at the edge to survive simultaneous failures. There's just so many things now with, domain-attached clusters, non-domain-attached clusters, using Azure as your storage witness. A lot of options. And all of this, again, whether it's on-premise or the cloud, is usually HyperV Storage Spaces Direct, stores-defined networking if you're into the HyperV convergence, and then, configure a lot of this in the admin center. Then, other than the cluster itself, 2019 had its, wizard, pretty much doing the test. So new clusters running 2019 will not require NTLM. So they're getting rid of backward compatibility, pure Kerberos, which is nice. And again, that's nice. Every version that comes out, they seem to, again, drop an older version. Once 2008 R2 is gone, we can actually get rid of legacy altogether. That's probably the next version coming out. So it completely removes the requirement of Active Directory for clusters, right? No NTLM anymore. Like I said, hybrid, backup, site recovery, storage migration services, and pretty much everything accessible here in the admin center. So let's go over and take a look. I'll go over to my server here. So over here I have, let's see, I'll get rid of that one. I do have my other server. Yes, client 3. Now when you install 2019, you install 2019 to log in for the first time. Usually in the upper left, they might ask you, hey, you want to install Windows Admin Center. Windows Admin Center is an add-on, not part of the actual physical installation right now. And I kind of call it middleware, which essentially, we still have the MMC snap-ins, we still have the other utilities we used. I kind of call this middleware because it gets in the middle of things, and it's a nice little utility. So I installed it on my 2010 computer here. Let's see, where did you go? Where'd you go? I just had it there. Yeah, there's Windows Admin Center, so I'll go into that. Like I said, usually it's a single server that we'll look at here in a second. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so we pretty much get this installed, and then up in the upper left, you have just the Windows Admin Center, but you also have the ability to look at this, based off, looking at just server management, looking at all the servers that can be deployed in the Windows Admin Center. So another nice thing is if we're dealing with failover clustering, we can actually look at the Admin Center to help us configure that. So we have the failover cluster we can look at, or also the Hyper-V Converged networking. So we can look at any of the drop downs there we'd have, looking at individual servers, or I'm looking at Windows 10, so I'm looking at the computer management side. Also the server management side, just be looking at 2012 or 2012 R2, and then also the ability here for Windows Admin Center to look at virtual machines in the cloud. So we install it on this server, or actually this is a workstation. So this is a Windows 10 client, and of course what I did here is I went up and added a 2012 R2 server, and then down here I've also added my Lund DC1. So I have a 2019 server, I have a 2012 server, I have a Windows 10 computer, and then down here I have two virtual machines. One virtual machine is coming from a tenant up in Azure, and the other one's coming from just a different tenant. So all they would do is come up and say add, and over here you'd have the different things we can add in, like Windows servers, obviously. And usually, again, it goes from 2012 R2 all the way up to 2019. So I would just come in here and add my server, right, based off DNS resolution or even the IP address. Mostly DNS resolution, you add the server in. Once you add it in, it pretty much converges in here. So down here I have my Lund DC1, pretty much the the domain controller on premise. I'll click on that, add that in. Once I connect to it, and once again authenticate in, which I'm going to authenticate in here with the the admin that's pretty much on the DC, which is my domain administrator. So down here I'm going to log into this guy as my domain admin. All right, we'll log into him, and I'm going to have to remember his password. Make sure I log into that guy. So once I get logged in, now usually I can make these credentials always the same, but since all these virtual machines are in different different Hyper-V hosts, then I have a different login for each. I'm just going to log in down here as my domain admin, and we'll continue through, and that'll punch me right through. So let me see, lab class administrator. This should be this guy here. Yeah, lab. Oh, I did the wrong one. That's right. It asked me to change my password last night. I have to remember my password. There we go. Now, just so you know, this Windows 10 computer is a standalone computer. This Windows 10 computer is not joined to a domain. It's not in the cloud. It's standalone here within my Hyper-V server. So I have a Windows 10 Hyper-V client, and I got a Windows 10 Hyper-V server or Hyper-V computer inside of it. And again, it's not joined to anything. So I log in. Think about Admin Center is it requires Windows Remote Management WinRM port 5985. So you have that port 5985 open. And Windows Remote Management is on the client. Once we have that with authentication into the physical virtual machine, and we can see we're just getting overview information here. So a lot of the command line utilities are here: restart, shutdown. Right, we're getting disk metrics. Obviously, the computer ID, the future managing alerts. Now, what we have is the hybrid integration of this utility, Windows Admin Center, with the Azure Cloud. And in the Azure Cloud, you have Security Center and the Login Analytics OMS Workspace. You can actually install the agent on this virtual machine and then take advantage of the hybrid utilities like managing alerts. So up here, I would need the agent. I need an agent on my DC1 so I can have my alerts trigger right up in Azure's cloud. So I would say manage alerts. And if I say monitoring alerts here, this would actually take me right up to the Azure cloud. These alerts are generated. So he wants me to log into my subscription in Azure, which I'll do. And again, I'm on my Windows 10 computer, not joined to the domain, but actually I'm into my DC1 saying DC1, I'm going to bring my monitoring agent down and start creating alerts from this server up to the cloud. All right, so I'll say, yeah, go ahead and sign in. And of course, yeah, this will spin a little bit, but then we'll see, right, creating alerts here on this computer where the alerts are actually being triggered up in Azure. So right there, create and view alerts in Azure. So even though it said I couldn't get up there, right, see my agent's having a problem, couldn't get it. But the agent's running here, I say create an alert, it's going to bring up the Azure dashboard, but the agent's trigger here, but right, the alerts actually show up in Azure, I'm just going to subscribe to them. So that's your hybrid, linking the on-premise computer out to the cloud utilizing Azure services. Well, maybe you don't want to do anything with Azure. Down here, you have remote desktop. This is a nice one. In other words, you ever try to go into a virtual machine or to a physical machine and you can't get in because the service is down? That means you have to log in physically, turn on RDP, and then you can log in remotely. Well, this actually allows me to turn on remote connection remotely without even logging into the machine. So again, that's through Windows Remote Management and WMI, being able to push settings remotely here. I'll be able to turn remote desktop on this computer ever logging in, then I can RDP into it. So that's in the cloud or on premise with a couple of clicks. Environment variables, monitoring alerts, power configuration. Again, we have the ability to pretty much do a lot of this on that computer remotely. And this is just within the overview, right down here in the setup and the overview. So right away, again, we're getting a lot of information based off real-time statistics. Same thing you'd probably get in Server Manager. Disk allocation, right down here, you just scroll. You get the 4 bottleneck area: CPU, memory, Ethernet, and obviously disk. As you come down the Windows Admin Center on the physical machine, now this is a virtual machine on premise, but it could be physical, as you latch into Azure Backup. Right, you're using Azure as your disaster recovery. So you just go into this physical or virtual machine and set up your Azure Backup. You need a recovery vault. So Azure Backup, you have the recovery vault, you have the OMS agent, and of course now we're going to use Azure Backup to back up on-premise resources out to the cloud. Or we can back up resources in the cloud. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at a physical machine, or I should stop saying physical, but we're looking at an on-premise virtual machine versus just going up here back to the admin center and add in a virtual machine from the cloud. This is a virtual machine spinning up in Azure, right? Cloud-app.azure. Same thing, I click on the virtual machine. I have to log into it with my credentials. Right. I'll authenticate through. And again, in the cloud, all I did was open up port 5985. Make sure remote management's turned on, right? So 5985's on, the port's open, and I get in. I get into this machine remotely. Same thing, we're looking at this virtual machine now in the cloud. This is out there in the cloud, right? CPU, memory, Ethernet, disk. Right? And I can also back it up right here. Instead of logging into Azure's portal, right, I can control my backups and restorations right here from this console. So whether it's a virtual machine in Azure, physical machine on premise, or it could be an AWS, VMware, it could be anywhere, right? I can just invoke backups out to Azure. It becomes disaster recovery in Azure. Yeah, you can monitor certificates, manage certificates. You got device management. So a lot of these, again, individual snap-ins. They'll say there's at least 20, a minimum of 20 other snap-ins within this console. Right, so you got certificate management. And look at that. You have the certificate store being exposed. Right, devices within this, device manager, events, files, and firewall, right? Dealing with the firewall here also. So all your device management, looking at disk drives. So there's a lot of inventory. There'll be my information, events, files. Which again, we're just looking at the files on the system, so the file structure. And of course, you have the firewall. And any installed apps, which gives us site, and especially because you can put, you can actually go out and look at clients, right? Windows 10 clients, and then you can go in and see what applications may be installed. Are they in compliance? It's the storage capacity. Firewall, which is remote. So in this instance, again, we might be able to get down here and look at incoming, outgoing rules. Now we're just more or less identifying things going on in the system. But again, this is in the cloud, so it's a little slower right here. So this is my rules within the virtual machine. So I have, new, enable, disable. So I'm not logging into the virtual machine. I'm not doing PowerShell. But just so you know, everything you're doing here is actually invoking PowerShell. Right? So that's always been the thing, right? PowerShell is being invoked on the back end, but we're just GUIfying this up, getting all our settings within the admin center. But yeah, add rules, delete rules. This is nice. Looking at apps, local users, and then they have the network. Now the network here is the one that they talk about based off adding an Azure network adapter, mostly on-premise, taking an on-premise server and allowing it to have a point-to-site connection up to the cloud. So let me go back over here to the Windows Admin Center. I'm going to click back on my DC1 on-premise. I'll connect to it automatically. Then I'll go over to my network. And inside of here is where, again, I can have this, main controller is on-premise, but I need to access resources in the cloud. So I need to set up this network adapter, this Azure network adapter. What you do is you click on it. Over on the side, you'll give it your subscription. Now, again, I'm over in East US, so my resources are in East US, so I'll plug this into East US. Then it'll automatically latch into the virtual network I have in that Azure subscription. I can actually go right up to the portal. I can view the actual virtual network in the portal, see what address space it is. This address space is a 10.1064, so my gateway subnet is going to be right there in that subnet. And then down here, this domain controller. This domain controller subnet is 192.168.0.0/24, a C-class subnet. What will happen is I'll make create a route between the Azure environment and the on-premise environment. So if I say create, this will create this VPN gateway, which is a point to site, creating a connection between my on-premise server and the cloud gateway. So I can actually Access cloud resource with my domain controller. I'm just going to start adding domain controllers in the cloud so we can replicate back and forth, or whatever other reason. We're setting up the point-to-site gateway. Later on will be the actual true site-to-site, right? This is the early implementation of this, mostly for maybe the client side. I can actually go into a Windows 10 client and set up a point-to-site on the client out to the cloud so the guy can actually be on his laptop and accessing maybe the SQL databases with Management Studio from a point-to-site connection. Later on, it'll be a server-to-server, right? Site-to-site connection, server-to-server. So it's getting there, but I create it, and next thing you know, we can start pinging on-premise out to the cloud through the gateway. This, again, was like 20, 30 steps, and it took a little bit to set up. Now it's a little bit easier. Just, obviously testing on the other side then. Go back to the Windows Admin Center, and I'm going to click back on my virtual machine in Azure. Another nice feature they give us down here is Remote PowerShell. Right, so I just get the virtual machine I want, come down here and just click on PowerShell. It automatically invokes a remote PowerShell into that virtual machine. So whether it's on-premise in the cloud, I don't even know where it is. It's just added in. All I have to do is authenticate in with my local password. And I should be into remote session. There you go. So I'm into remote session. Everything I do here is actually running out on that server. What I'm worried about is losing sight of all the login commands, right? Because everything's goofied. So if I, connect to Azure account, but now if I do get service or whatever it is, right, it's giving me all the services that are running out in that virtual machine out there. Right, so now you're into remote PowerShell session. Once I step off of that, it'll ask me to close it. So you got processes, registry access, remote desktop. Right, so again, if remote desktop's unenabled, I have the ability to enable it here. Installing roles and features remotely, modifying scheduled tasks, stopping and starting services, and then you're into the 3 areas of storage. So yeah, disconnect, reconnect, right? We can turn. That's the thing I like about this. I can turn this service on remotely without even logging into it. That's to me an advancement. So at least it tells me, right, how I'd log in and stuff like that. Yeah, actually, do you want to connect? So actually, self-signed certificate is a little bit more secure, right? Based off going into that server, I'm going to remote access. Yeah, only a little bit of time here. So we got storage. Now, storage, again, gives you the ability to look at storage on this server. So you're just looking at storage. Capacity management. Disks, volumes, file shares. On the server, this virtual machine, again, is in Azure. But again, I can attach secondary storage. So maybe I have another VHD disk in Azure. I want to attach it as secondary storage to a virtual machine out there. I can do it through this console. Migrate servers and file shares to Azure. Right, using storage migration service. So this is just one area of attaching, detaching, or looking at storage capacity. The other one, again, is probably the service I like the most, which is storage migration service. Now, again, before I go there, let's go over to the domain controller. I'm going to go back to Windows Admin Center and then click back on my domain controller. Because what I want to show you is here, I'm on the DC. This is a 2019 server. This is a 2019 server. I go down to my storage migration service. Now, what you can do is you can say, well, I'm gonna try to migrate an older 2012 server, its data over to this 2019 server. So I create a routine. Create a job and inventory your server. So if all you want to do is inventory, you can just gather information and go with it later. Transfer data from your older servers now. Right? So go over to your older servers and transfer the data to 2019 through this routine. And then after you're done, after everything's replicated, then you can cut off the older servers and everything's moved over to 2019 for you through this routine. So I'll close this out. And then up here you'd have, or when you go into this, is actually at the bottom. You create a new job here at the bottom of this service. Just give it a job, test, migrate. And then you're just going to ask, it's going to ask you what server you're going to migrate from. So what you do is when it inventories devices, then you'll just put username and password, right? The account that you need to scan this older server, go into its storage and start migrating a 2019 server here. In essence, that would be my lab class account. All right, and we'll go in with the old password, actually newer password. All right, so once I can authenticate in, then it's going to ask me to start scanning items. So this is where I would just go out and add a device. This device will be, again, my LUN-2012 server. So if I get a name resolution, that should happen, or FQDN. Once I get my server in here, then I just start scanning the server. The server's going to start scanning it for all the shares and storage. Once that scan is done, I'll click on the server. I'll pick what shares I want, and I'll just start migrating it to the server here. It's 1, 2, 3 done. Now you can keep an in-time sync. You're migrating from one server to another. Do you want to keep that 2012 server in operation? Therefore, if I drop data into 2012, it synchronizes 2019 right away, or do I want to cut off 2012 pretty quickly? It just depends on how long do you want to have coexistence. But again, another nice utility here. Storage replica, 2 stores replicating data back and forth. Right, just that's pretty much a 2016 service, but they revamped it for 2019. So replicating data on-premise back and forth, from cluster to cluster, on-premise to the cloud, cloud back to on-premise. There's all kinds of routines here based off storage replica. Another nice one is the system insights. This one, again, when you first click on it, it will ask you to install an agent. You go ahead and say install agent. It takes about a couple of minutes. Once the agent installs, then it'll come back and start forecasting things moving forward. So this is, again, my domain controller, which I turned on system insights. Over here, I'll go up to CPU capacity forecasting. Now, this is my CPU as it ran for the last 2 months. And it looks like, based off the average, I'm never going to be spiking my CPU. So the forecast, this is the future, based off things that it's seen. It's either going to say, well, you're pretty active, it'll forecast going up, and that means we have to add more CPU strength over time. As of right now, it looks like I have no need to upgrade my CPU based off the statistics here. So forecasting, giving you, again, right, growth analytics moving forward. So again, CPU, yep, networking, and then yep, total storage is also nice. Being able to just, look at storage capacity over time. All right, so storage replica, storage migration, and pretty much, yep, the system insights we also have available to us. So with all that being said, right, we have the backup, site recovery, yep, site migration services, and yep, the Azure network adapter, right, being able to, look at on-premise out to the cloud based off all the other features. So out of that, then we'd have the system insights, right, being able to, turn on the system insights, and then looking at, right, all those different areas, which can be CPU storage and network, high capacity, which really is what it's doing. System analytics is, right, predicting storage capacity moving forward. So that's really all this is going to tell you in the end is, using performance counters and events, providing insight to the functioning of your server. So mostly, again, it's events and performance counters constantly coming in and, giving us forecasting moving forward. So other than that, guys, well, I can go on forever, but I'm going to conclude today's session, right, coming in at the end here. So I want to encourage everyone to visit Directions Training. Let me just go back down here so we don't get too lost in the mix. Let me just go back down here. Yep, so the insights. And mostly, like, I just wanted to do a lot of the Admin Center, right? That's the newer feature coming in 2019. So take a look at that. Windows Admin Center, familiar tools. Usually 20 different tools you can have to your availability. And, of course, you have the Admin Center also does unified management. So Linux and Windows. And pretty much everything based off, the data center, right? Windows Admin Data Center for Hyperconvergence. A lot of things going on there also, right? Based off all the settings I kind of showed you in the Admin Center. And so Security Management System Center and then the admin tools. A lot of those remote server administration tools are wrapped up into the Windows Admin Center for you. All right, guys. So other than that, I definitely want to thank you guys for joining me. Like I said, I can go on forever. Encourage everyone to visit directiontraining.com. Check out our corresponding classes, right, based off today's webinar. Based off 2019, one of the courses that would map close is 20745, Software-Defined Networking. There's a course out there, Microsoft 20745, which is Microsoft's Software-Defined Networking. That would be the closest one to 2019. I think come midsummer, we're looking for all the 2019 courses to come out. So I do appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you see you again in class or perhaps maybe the next webinar. If anybody has any additional questions, I'll be hanging here a little bit. We'll keep the mic open. So we'll be hanging here for a little bit with a few minutes, and of course, any questions, I'll try to get them to you. All right, guys, and thanks for joining me. We'll hope to see you again.